Our attention for what regards the war in Ukraine is currently focused on when and how will hostilities stop, as we also explained in the previous video. But what is awaiting us after that? If neither side manages to fully win the war and accepts more or less defeat, how can it prepare for the more important challenge of winning the peace? First of all, it's necessary to secure a lasting peace by removing the root causes of the conflict. And even if this sounds counterintuitive or unfair, it's necessary to address the reasons that brought Russia to the dramatic decision of attacking its neighbor. So it's about Russia's perception of its place in the world and its ever-present fear of an invasion from Europe. Russia has no natural borders that would protect it from the West, as the Sarmatic plain that opens up in Poland allows for a fast movement of troops until the Ural Mountains, as history teaches us in the case of the Polish, Napoleonic, and Nazi invasions. So it's clear why Russian strategic culture places enormous importance on buffer zones, friendly or neutral states around its borders to prevent the perceived encirclement. When Ukraine moved decisively towards the West, politically, economically, militarily, Russia saw it as an existential threat. One can debate whether that perception is justified, but in strategic terms, Russia's goal has been to block Ukraine's westward shift and maintain influence on what it considers its traditional sphere of influence. Understanding that fear, even if one disagrees with it, is essential in assessing how far is Russia willing to go and how difficult a compromise will be. On the other hand, what are Ukraine's priorities when negotiating a peace deal? Strangely enough, territories are least important. Being clear that Russia will not accept returning the land it has seized in the east is getting them back actually an interest of Ukraine? Many of those areas have seen significant demographic shifts. Much of the pro-Ukrainian population has fled, and those who remain tend to be pro-Russian, either by sincere belief or due to years of Russian occupation and propaganda. Moreover, reconstruction will be extremely expensive. Infrastructure is destroyed, industry is ruined, housing is uninhabitable. From a purely strategic point of view, regaining territory might impose a long-term financial and political cost that outweighs its value, at least in the short and medium term. Ukraine might prefer a scenario where the cost of governing and rebuilding those regions falls on Russia, while Kyiv consolidates control over its remaining territories and accelerates integration with Europe. Fight corruption, which is still very present also in public administration, foster democracy, strengthen state institutions, and improve public trust in them. Issues of language minorities such as Russian or Hungarian will have to be tackled. In short, build a successful European country poised to become a success story in contrast to its Soviet past and its Russian neighbor. With all this in mind, to better understand why peace makes sense, it's good to understand who has gained what from this war. Ukraine has lost territory, population, infrastructure, and much of its economic capacity. Maybe the only thing it has clearly gained is a strong sense of national identity separate from Russia, which was previously much more blurred. Russia has faced sanctions, international isolation, demographic decline, and mounting casualties, while it managed to build a land bridge to Crimea annexed in 2014 and somehow enlarge the controlled area in Donbass, even though, even to this day, it has not managed to conquer it fully. On the other hand, it was unable to prevent Ukraine from drifting westward, convinced Sweden and Finland to abandon neutrality and join NATO, and has become ever more dependent on China. Not really a strategic success. It's actually two external powers who have benefited the most. Most of all, China, of course, which has seen its strategic global position grow by making Russia its junior partner. And the United States, which has reinforced transatlantic unity, expanded NATO, and blocked the possibility of any strategic rapprochement between Europe and Russia. From a global perspective, the war has reinforced bipolar competition between the US and China, sidelining Europe and preventing EU-Russian integration, which could have diminished US strategic influence. And what about refugees? Nearly 7 million Ukrainians have fled abroad. Any settlement will need to address their future. Will they return? Can they return? And what kind of country will they come back to? Some may even have permanently resettled. Others may return only if reconstruction succeeds and security is assured. The management of this human displacement will be a defining issue for post-war Ukraine and for Europe, which will bear much of the social and economic cost. And since we are at it, what about Europe? How will Europe develop its geopolitical position and its relations with Russia? For Europe, the post-conflict question is fundamental. Should it continue its current strategy of containment and isolation of Russia, or, at some point, seek to re-establish diplomatic and economic ties? Eastern Europe will argue for caution. Countries like Poland, Estonia, Lithuania consider Russia a perennial threat. On the other hand, some Central and Western European countries, as for example Germany, Italy, and partially also France, may argue for pragmatism, especially if energy prices remain high and economic pressures mount. In either case, Europe will carry the main burden of Ukrainian reconstruction, both financially and politically. Whether Europe chooses deterrence, engagement, or a mix of both will shape the next decades of continental security. And what about Russia? Its economy showed resilience in the early years of the war due to strong commodity revenues and centralized economic management. But by 2025, it already faces rising inflation, a weak ruble, and labor shortages due to mobilization and immigration. Rebuilding occupied territories like Donbass and southern Ukraine will add to this pressure. At the same time, Russia's increased dependence on China has tilted the balance of power. Economically, politically, and technologically, Moscow is moving closer to Beijing, even though culturally the two countries are not destined for love and unlimited friendship. If the war ends without a clear Russian victory, internal tensions could grow, particularly among the security elites or the Siloviki, who may view any settlement as a strategic defeat. Putin would then have to manage not just external diplomacy, but internal factionalism. He could come out weakened, and if replaced, a more radical, anti-European and aggressive leader is likely to emerge. The prospects are, to be sincere, not rosy. A future peace will not bring us back to the roaring 2000s, and the new division that had hit Europe is likely to leave a strong mark on the future decades. Nevertheless, the choice between confrontation, mutual accusations, and conflict, or diplomacy, gradual trust building, and a slow but steady growing economic cooperation is real, and it will be up to the politicians and their wisdom to decide which path to take.